Vijay Singh, 3 major titles, 34 PGA Tour victories, 32 weeks standing at the top of the world. A living monument who redefined the meaning of perseverance in modern golf. From the PGA Championship in 1998 to the green jacket at the Masters in 2000, then the extraordinary 2004 season, with 9 victories and ending Tiger Woods' streak of 264 consecutive weeks holding the #1 ranking. Vijay conquered the harshest golf courses with discipline, practice, and a will that almost never knew how to stop. But behind that glory is a story that is not glamorous but harsh. A boy from Fiji, with no ready-made path leading to the top. A young career almost blocked by the 1985 scorecard controversy. Years of having to teach golf to make a living, wandering through many countries to find a future again. The flights, hotels, and countless hours on the practice range that brought him to greatness, but also took away the irreplaceable times beside Ardina and Sun Kos. And then in 2013, when Vijay already had almost everything a golfer could dream of, his name was again dragged into controversy related to deer antler spray. Once again, what was questioned was not just a round, but the reputation of the man who had spent decades building his name through labor. And now at the age of 63, when the majors have belonged to history, Tiger Woods is no longer the opponent that needs to be overcome, and time is beginning to become an unbeatable opponent. What still makes Vijay Singh continue to step onto the course? To understand why that question hurts so much, one must go back long before Augusta, before the #1 ranking, and before the controversies, back to Fiji, where a boy named Vijay Singh early learned that if he wanted a path to go up, he could not wait for anyone to open it for him. Before the controversies, the major titles and the world #1 ranking appeared. Vijay Singh was only a boy growing up between Lautoka and Nadi, Fiji, in an Indo-Fijian family very far from the centers of power of American and European golf. There was no prestigious academy waiting, no selection system taking him to the PGA Tour, nor any evidence that a child from a small island nation in the middle of the Pacific could one day step onto Augusta or stand above all the best golfers in the world. His father, Mohan Singh, worked as an aircraft technician at Nadi Airport and also played golf. It was Mohan who placed the club in Vijay's hands, taught him the first principles, and opened the door leading to a world their family had never belonged to. But that was not the story of a prodigy discovered early. In the family itself, Vijay's 2 older brothers initially even played golf better than he did. That meant from very early on, Vijay had to live with an uncomfortable truth. Talent did not automatically make him special. If he wanted to rise, he had to improve. I'll mention this just once. I've gathered these unforgettable sports stories, trivia, and memories into a book called The Golden Age of Sports Trivia for Seniors. If it sounds like something you'd enjoy, the link is in the comments. He had to observe more carefully. He had to practice more. He had to correct the mistakes that others might overlook. And from that, a habit formed. The habit that later almost defined Vijay Singh's entire career. Not waiting for inspiration, not relying on feeling, only repeating until the body understood what the mind was trying to learn. The path to the golf course was not always convenient either. There were times Vijay carried clubs on his back, bent down walking through a pipe under the airport area to shorten the distance to the place he wanted to practice. That was only a small detail in his youth, but it almost contained his entire later life. When there was no easy path, Vijay did not stand still complaining. He found another way. When he did not have what he needed, he tried to work with what he had. When a door did not open, he did not immediately conclude that he did not belong behind it. Mohan also understood that his son had a tall, long body and needed a more suitable model to learn from. He advised Vijay to observe golfers of similar build, and Vijay was drawn to the swing images of Tom Weiskopf. The boy studied every posture, every movement, every weight shift, then took them to the practice range and repeated them until they became more natural. There was no modern technology, no data analysis systems like later young golfers, only eyes, memory, feeling, and patience. A good swing was not viewed by Vijay as a gift. It was something that had to be built bit by bit, and perhaps that is what made him different. He did not grow up believing he was born to win. He grew up believing that if today was not good enough, tomorrow he had to do more. That way of thinking was both a strength and a burden. Because when a person believes that every gap can be narrowed by labor, they also find it very hard to allow themselves to stop. The more Vijay progressed, the more he practiced, the more he saw his ability, the more he recognized the shortcomings. Each step forward did not bring lasting satisfaction, but only opened a new standard. Golf gradually was no longer just the game he liked. It became the only path he saw clearly enough to place his future in. While still very young, Vijay left school to devote more to golf, a choice that carried both aspiration and risk. There was no guaranteed diploma behind, no safe career waiting if everything failed. In 1982, he turned professional. For a young man from Fiji, that should have been a moment full of hope. The years of observing, repeating, and self-correcting finally seemed to have opened a door. Vijay could believe that if he continued doing what he had always done, practicing more, enduring more, and not stepping back, the future would gradually belong to him. But life is not a practice range, and not everything can be fixed by adding another basket of balls. Only 3 years later, when Vijay had just begun stepping into the professional world, an incident would put everything he had just built at risk of collapsing, and for the first time in his life, he had to face a problem that working harder alone might not be enough to solve. In 1985, when Vijay Singh was just over 20 years old and still trying to find a fragile place in the professional golf world, an incident occurred that could have ended everything before his career truly began. At the Indonesian Open, Vijay was accused of altering his scorecard. He denied the accusation, but the denial was not enough to prevent the consequences. The Asian circuit still imposed discipline, and in a short time, the path Vijay had spent his entire youth pursuing suddenly became unclear. The most painful thing was not that a tournament was lost or a prize money disappeared. Vijay at that time did not have 3 majors to protect his name, did not have 34 PGA Tour victories, had never been world number 1, did not have a resume large enough to force others to listen to how he saw the matter. He was only a young golfer from Fiji, a name still too small in a system where reputation could decide who was given more opportunities and who was left behind. An accusation like that did not just hurt 1 week of competition, it threatened the very future Vijay had bet almost everything on. Only a few years earlier, he was still the boy observing Tom Weiskopf's swing, taking inconvenient paths just to reach the golf course, and believing that if he practiced enough, he could narrow every gap. But 1985 forced him to face a more brutal truth. There are problems that cannot be fixed just by hitting another 100 balls. Vijay could practice a better swing, could improve his putting, could make his body stronger, but he could not completely control how others saw his name. And at a still very young age, when the career was not yet large enough to absorb a blow like that, it was an almost devastating feeling. Yet right in that unstable period, something completely different happened in his private life. Ardna Seth entered Vijay's life before America knew who he was, before the green jacket at Augusta, before the world number 1 ranking, before the huge prize money, and before everything that later made the name Singh a part of golf history. They married in 1985, right in the period when Vijay's professional future was not at all certain. The value of that detail lies in the fact that Ardna did not come to a legend. She stood beside a man who was trying to understand whether he still had any path left to go. Looking back from many decades later, that gives their relationship a completely different meaning. She knew Vijay when he had nothing to use as proof that everything would be okay. No major title to reassure, no money to soften the uncertainty. Only a young golfer, a bag of clubs, and a future just covered with a question mark. After the blow in 1985, Vijay did not immediately step into a glorious comeback. His life turned into a stage very far from the big stages he had once dreamed of. He worked as a club professional in Borneo, teaching others to play golf to make a living. Imagine that paradox. A man who had once placed his entire future on becoming a professional golfer now stood beside the course, adjusting grips, correcting stances, instructing others how to take the club through the ball, while he himself did not know whether he would still be allowed back on the big competitive path. During the day, golf was work. After work hours, golf again became the place he tried to hold on to the version of himself that had not yet disappeared. He continued practicing, not in front of spectators, not to prepare for a major final round, not because cameras were waiting, only because if he stopped too long, the distance between him and the dream would grow larger and larger. This was the low point of Vijay Singh's journey, but there is no need to exaggerate it into complete despair to see how much it hurt. A young man who had left school early, chosen golf instead of a safer path, was now living by that very sport, but in a role very different from what he had once imagined. He still had the club in his hands, but no longer knew where that club would lead him. He still had Ardna beside him, but could not promise her that one day all the difficulties would be rewarded. He still had the ability to play golf, but that ability was not yet enough to guarantee a stage waiting for him to return. Perhaps this very period explains why Vijay later became famous for practicing almost without knowing fatigue. When one has once seen the professional path almost disappear, the feeling of safety is very hard to return completely. He learned that opportunities can close, reputation can change, a season can turn into a turning point in a very short time. But there was still one thing he could control, whether tomorrow he would pick up the club or not. Vijay could not go back to the Indonesian Open and change what had happened. He could not force everyone to believe the way he told the story. He also could not know whether the professional path would ever open wide enough again to take him to the place he had once dreamed of. But he could wake up the next morning, he could step onto the course, he could place a ball on the ground and hit it, then another one. And right in those days, with no promise about the future, Vijay Singh made the choice that would shape the rest of his life. He would not let 1985 become the last sentence. After 1985, Vijay Singh did not have an immediate dazzling comeback. No big stage opened the door, no single victory powerful enough to erase what had happened, nor anyone standing up to guarantee that he would be given more opportunities. What remained was only golf and a man who still refused to give it up. From that low point, Vijay began rebuilding his career in the slowest way possible, going to anywhere that still allowed him to compete, accepting courses far from the center, different tournament systems, different weather conditions, and learning to live with the fact that no one in the United States was watching. He played in Asia, then found his way to Africa and Europe, carrying his clubs, limited experience, and a reputation not yet large enough to open easy doors. Each country was another test. Harder courses, stronger winds, different grass, longer trips, and prize money not always large enough to make the future feel safe. But Vijay was used to not waiting for favorable circumstances. He adapted, he observed, he adjusted his swing, adjusted his strategy, adjusted his way of living. Those years did not create a moment when the whole world simultaneously recognized the name Vijay Singh. They created something quieter, a golfer increasingly hard to knock out of the game. He began winning in many different countries, from Malaysia, Nigeria, Ivory Coast, Morocco to Zimbabwe, Singapore, Spain, Germany, South Africa, and many other places. Each trophy did not take him straight to the PGA Tour, but it proved something more important. 1985 had not ended his career. One victory opened another invitation. A good season created another opportunity. Then that opportunity led to a new stretch of road. Vijay did not return with one jump. He returned with hundreds of small steps that most of the world did not see. Those very small steps gradually turned the years that seemed like a detour into the harshest school of his life. Golf on many continents forced Vijay to become someone who could compete when conditions were imperfect, when the schedule was inconvenient, when there was no familiar feeling, and when no one cared whether his story was beautiful or not. He was no longer just the Fiji boy who knew how to practice a lot. He became a professional who understood that surviving at the top of golf required more than a good swing. It required the ability to step onto a strange course, a strange country, and still find a way to produce a score. Those years also made Vijay understand deeply the value of each opportunity. For a golfer who had once seen his professional path blocked, A playing spot was not something taken for granted. A round was not something that could be wasted. A good practice day was not a reason to be complacent. That is why, when the door to the United States began to open more clearly, Vijay stepped into it not like a young talent exploring his ability. He stepped in like someone who had gone through too many detours to still believe that opportunities would wait forever. In 1993, Vijay won the Buick Classic, his first PGA Tour victory. At the end of the season, he was awarded PGA Tour Rookie of the Year. But even that moment contained a very Vijay Singh paradox. He was already around 30 years old. In a sports world that likes prodigies, talents discovered early and stars exploding in their 20s, Vijay was only truly beginning to build his position in America when many other golfers already had nearly a decade of attention. He arrived late, and in professional sports, arriving late means the clock has already started running before you even step onto the stage. But Vijay did not view age as a condemnation. He turned the years he had lost on the detour into an advantage. He had more experience, understood himself better, endured pressure better, and most importantly, no longer romanticized the path ahead. He knew every victory could disappear if he did not work the next day, so he continued practicing with an intensity that made many colleagues take notice. In the early and mid-1990s, Vijay was not just trying to win more tournaments, he was trying to prove that for the first time in his life, he could stay long-term in a big system. Victories began to accumulate. His name appeared more frequently on leaderboards. The name Fiji was no longer just a strange detail in the introduction. It was attached to a golfer who was becoming increasingly dangerous, especially when rounds dragged on and others began to tire. But the majors were still there like a final door not yet opened. And when Vijay stepped into the PGA Championship in 1998, he was 35 years old. For many athletes, age 35 is the time people start talking about what has passed. For Vijay, the biggest thing was still ahead. When he finally won the PGA Championship and became a major champion, that moment was not just a trophy. It was more than a decade compressed into a scorecard. 1985, Borneo, the trips through Asia, Africa, and Europe, the tournaments few people remember, the times he had to start over, and thousands of shots executed when no one had a reason to believe that one day they would lead here. The man who once did not know whether he still had a future in golf finally stood in the ranks of major champions. But for Vijay Singh, even that victory was not the end. It only proved that the longest detour of his life had finally taken him to the place he had once feared he would never reach. After the 1998 PGA Championship, Vijay Singh was no longer the man who had to travel the world just to prove he deserved a place in top-level golf. 2 years later, at the age of 37, he stepped onto Augusta National and won the green jacket of the 2000 Masters, one of the most prestigious symbols of the sport. From distant Fiji to Augusta, from the years of having to find detours through many continents to the moment of standing in the ranks of the greatest champions, Vijay finally had something the whole world could not deny: the position of a top golfer. But the greater the success, the more crowded life became. The schedule stretched long. Flights followed one after another. Practice sessions started early and ended late. The rare days off were filled with preparation, recovery, and the new demands of a rising career. Golf had given Vijay fame, money, stability, and a future that the boy in Fiji had once not dared to be sure he could reach. But it could not give him more time. Ardina, who had been beside Vijay since before he had a major, now entered a different role. Previously, she stood beside a man who did not know where his professional future would go. Now, she had to adapt to the life of a family whose husband was home less and less, not because feelings had changed, but because his career demanded more and more. Kias grew up in the very years Vijay approached the peak. And later, Vijay once admitted something very simple, but also very painful. Ardina was the one who actually carried most of the raising of Kias, because he had to be away from home so much. There is no need to turn that statement into a family tragedy to understand its cost. A father can love his child deeply, but still miss ordinary mornings. He can want to be there, but still have to take the next flight. He can bring better things for the family, but cannot buy back a day that has already passed. That is the paradox of success that Vijay had to live with. Each victory took him higher, but each season also took away more weeks at home. Each hour on the practice range helped him perfect his swing, but it was also an hour that could not be used somewhere else. Golf helped Vijay create a much safer life for his family than what he had when he was young. But that very sport also made family life revolve around the rhythm of the tournament schedule. And Cass's childhood did not wait for tournaments to end. A child does not stop growing just because his father is in the final round on Sunday. Family milestones still arrive at their own time, whether Vijay was in Florida, California, or another country. This does not make him a cold father. On the contrary, the way he later spoke about Cass shows that his son meant a great deal to him. But love does not stop time. And perhaps that was the first thing in Vijay's life that discipline could not fix. A broken swing can be practiced again tomorrow. A bad season can be rebuilt. A ranking can be climbed again. But 1 year in a son's childhood happens only once. Vijay once hoped Cass would play golf, once imagined the possibility of passing on to his son what Mohan had given him. But even that gradually showed an important difference between generations. Vijay had had to see golf as the only path to expand his life. Cass did not need to live with that pressure. His son had the right to choose. And for Vijay, learning to accept that was perhaps also another form of growing up, harder than correcting a technique on the practice range. By the early 2000s, Vijay already had 2 majors, money, fame, and the recognition he had had to travel a very long road to obtain. That should have been the time he allowed himself to slow down. But he did not. He continued practicing, continued competing, continued demanding more from himself. Because somewhere inside Vijay there was still the man who had once seen his future almost disappear in 1985. The man who had learned that opportunities do not last forever. And so, while his career clock continued running toward the greatest peak, another clock still ran quietly at home. Cass continued growing up. Ardina continued keeping the family rhythm. And Vijay continued stepping forward, not yet knowing that only a few years later, at an age when most athletes begin talking about the past, he would step into the greatest season of his life. At the age of 41, Vijay Singh stepped into the 2004 season with a body that had gone through more than 2 decades of professional competition, a past full of detours, and a career that many of his generation would already have begun thinking about slowing down. But Vijay did not slow down. He accelerated. In an almost extraordinary season, he won 9 times on the PGA Tour, won the PGA Championship for the 2nd time, became the first golfer to surpass $10 million in prize money in a single season, and ended the year with the Player of the Year title. Those numbers were already enough to make 2004 the biggest year of his career. But what made it even more special was that the person standing at the top of the world at that time was not an ordinary name. Tiger Woods had held the world #1 ranking for 264 consecutive weeks, a streak so long that it almost made the entire sport of golf used to seeing the same person at the highest position. Tiger did not just win. He was the center of an entire era, the television face, the audience attraction, the standard that every other golfer had to measure himself against. And Vijay did not wait for that era to end. He did not wait for Tiger to grow old, did not wait for the light to shift to another generation. He rose while Tiger was still there. At the Deutsche Bank Championship, that race became more concrete than ever. Vijay played the coldest and most precise golf of his career, keeping the rhythm through every hole, every shot, and when the tournament ended, he did not just have another victory. He stepped up to the #1 position of the official world golf ranking, ending Tiger Woods' 264-week streak of dominance. For someone who had had to go through Borneo, Africa, Europe, and many years not knowing whether he still had a future in golf, that moment carried a meaning almost unbelievable. The Fiji boy who had once had to find his own way to the golf course now stood above everyone. The man who had once been seen as arriving late now stood in front of younger, more famous and more noticed golfers. But the most remarkable thing about Vijay Singh is not that he reached the peak at the age of 41, The remarkable thing is that after arriving there, he still did not know how to live like someone who had arrived. He still practiced, still stayed late on the course, still continued repeating the swing as if the number one position was only temporary and tomorrow could take it away. Others might see number one as the final reward for a lifetime career. For Vijay, it seemed only to become a new standard that needed to be protected. Perhaps this came from his past. When a person has once seen his professional path almost disappear, the feeling of safety is very hard to return. Vijay had learned that reputation can change, opportunities can close, and what today seems certain may no longer exist tomorrow. So even when the whole world said he was at the peak, his instinct still said he had to continue. The peak is not a place to rest. It is only a more dangerous place to stand if you stop. In the years after 2004, Vijay still maintained an amazing competitive ability. He continued winning, continued appearing in big races, and still forced younger golfers to respect a man who refused to let age decide his speed. By 2008, at the age of 45, when many athletes had long left their prime, Vijay won the FedEx Cup. Once again, he stretched the limit of what people thought a golfer of that age could still do. But time does not disappear just because Vijay was better at delaying it. Each new season still added flights, rounds, practice hours, swings and days the body had to bear the load. For many years he had forced his body to adapt to a workload that most others could not maintain. And the body responded with victories. But the body cannot respond forever. There is a truth that Vijay Singh gradually had to face. Discipline can help a person go farther than age, but it cannot erase age. The swings that had been repeated thousands of times without leaving a clear consequence began to demand longer recovery time. The practice sessions that had once been the way he reinforced confidence began to carry a different physical cost. Vijay had spent his whole life proving that he could do more than others, last longer than others, arrive late but still go farther. But after the 2004 season and the 2008 FedEx Cup, a new opponent began to appear. With no name on the leaderboard, unbeatable by birdies and uninterested in how long he had once been world number one. That was his own body. And for the first time, Vijay was about to have to learn that there are limits that even thousands of hours of practice cannot completely control. After decades of living by discipline and thousands of repeated swings, Vijay Singh began entering a stage where willpower was no longer enough to force the body to obey as before. Pain in the knees and back appeared more and more frequently. Recovery time lasted longer, and each practice session began to leave a cost that in his youth he could ignore. Vijay had spent his whole life believing that if the body weakened, he could make it stronger. If the swing lost rhythm, he could fix it. If form dropped, he could practice more. But when he went deep into his 40s then 50s, the body began reminding him that not every limit can be overcome by repetition. Right in that context, Deer Antler Spray appeared. Vijay used this product during the time he was dealing with knee and back problems, and then in 2013, everything suddenly went beyond the health story. The product was placed under the anti-doping issue because of its connection to IGF-1. The PGA Tour opened an investigation, and in a short time, the name Vijay Singh was again dragged into a controversy about integrity. Nearly 3 decades after 1985, a wound thought to have lain deep in the past was touched again. But this time Vijay was no longer the young man in his early 20s with no voice. He was a 3-major champion, former world number one of the most famous golfers for his harsh practice volume. That is why the bitterness was even greater. A person who had spent his whole life building achievements through labor now had to see his name appear in a debate that he himself believed had been handled unfairly. The PGA Tour initially proceeded with discipline, but later ended the process when the status of the product and the application of the rules were made clearer. For many people, the story could have ended there. For Vijay, it had not ended. He believed the way the tour handled the case had damaged the reputation he had spent decades building, and he decided to sue the PGA Tour. That was not a short battle. The lawsuit lasted more than 5 years, going through legal arguments, records, testimony and the years when Vijay was already on the other side of his career peak but still had to go back to protect his name. What made that battle painful was not the money. Vijay had earned enough not to need a lawsuit to save his financial life. What he wanted to protect was something much harder to value: the right to be seen as someone who did not deliberately seek an unfair advantage. By 2018, the two sides reached a settlement. In the joint statement, the PGA Tour emphasized that they viewed Vijay as one of the hardest-working golfers who had ever competed and did not believe he had intended to gain an unfair advantage over opponents. For someone who had lived almost his entire life among swings, scorecards, and self-imposed standards higher than most people, those words carried a meaning larger than a mere legal conclusion. But it also could not completely erase the years of controversy or force everyone to look at the past the same way. Vijay understood that. Reputation is not like a missed shot that can go back to the tee and be done again. Once the question has been raised, it can stay for a very long time. All he could do was refuse to let it become the last sentence. And that is also what Vijay had done throughout his life. He could not control age, could not force his knees and back to stay young forever, could not control every newspaper headline, nor could he guarantee that the world would always evaluate him the way he wished. But he could still decide how he would react. In 2018, the battle over reputation closed, and for the first time the story no longer needed to go back to 1985. Vijay had not been able to make everyone believe one version of the past, but he had spent more than 3 decades proving that one controversy was not enough to define an entire person. The trophies may fade, the body may slow down, but what he refused to give anyone was the right to write the last sentence about his own life. At the age of 63, Vijay Singh no longer has anything left to prove for his name to exist in golf history. 3 major titles, 34 PGA Tour victories, the week's standing at the world #1 ranking, and the 2004 season that once forced the entire Tiger Woods era to give way, are enough to define a career that very few people can reach. But time has its own way of making every achievement become silent. The trophies are still there. The numbers are still in the record books, only youth does not return. The years on airplanes, the mornings on the practice range, the weeks away from home, and the moments when Kaas was still small have passed in a way that no swing can fix. Vijay's body today is also no longer the body that won 9 times in one season at the age of 41. He still practices, still competes, still keeps the habits that have followed him almost his entire life. But the slowing of time makes something else clearer. Greatness can prolong a career, but it cannot prolong a child's childhood, or give back the days a father was absent because of work. And perhaps that is why the victory at the PNC Championship in 2022, together with Kaas, carries a very different meaning. Father and son had participated in the tournament for many years before finally stepping onto the highest podium together. That was not the Masters, not the PGA Championship. It does not change Vijay's place in history. But this time, he did not bring a trophy home for his son to see. He stood right beside his son when the victory happened. The long circle finally closed. Mohan Singh had once placed the golf club in Vijay's hands in Fiji. Vijay spent most of his life turning that club into a career. Once hoped Kaas would also pursue golf, but then learned to accept that his son did not need to become a copy of his father. Kaas chose a different life, and that does not make Vijay's affection smaller. Perhaps that is one of the deepest changes of the man who once believed that everything had to be improved by practice. There are things that do not need to be like himself to have value. Off the golf course, Vijay also dedicated part of his legacy to charity, supporting organizations that help women and children affected by domestic violence. But his greatest influence perhaps still lies in the journey from Fiji to the world #1 ranking, a journey that forced the golf world to expand its imagination of where a champion can come from. And now, at the age of 63, Vijay still returns to the practice range, no longer to prove he is more worthy than Tiger Woods, no longer to climb the ranking, no longer to erase any question of the past. Perhaps what all of us have long suspected about Vijay Singh finally becomes clear. His longest opponent was never only the person standing on the other side of the fairway, it was always the version of himself from yesterday. Time has taken away speed, taken away the years that cannot return, and reminded him that no career lasts forever. But it still has not taken away the simple belief that has followed Vijay since he was a boy in Fiji. The next shot can still be better than the last. If the story of Vijay Singh makes you believe that determination can take a person farther than circumstances and stumbles, please subscribe to the channel so we can explore more extraordinary lives behind sports legends together. Thank you for accompanying us to the end of this journey, and see you in the next video with another story about glory, loss, and the strength that refuses to surrender.